I had an epiphany about self-compassion and leadership. And it was a Mr. Magoo style situation where I quite literally stumbled into it. In fact, when I heard that I was defensive, I responded with, I am not defensive. I think you're being defensive for telling me that I'm defensive.
Classic defensive, babe.
And all of that is fundamentally a myth. Like, perfection is a myth. Control is a myth. These are not things that we could ever fully attain. And the critical voice that we all have is essentially espousing a myth to us.
Yeah.
Because it's trying to protect us. The voice is saying, if you're perfect, you'll be safe. If you're the smartest person in the room, you'll be safe. If you have a bigger team in your organization, if you have more money, if you have more title or prestige, then you'll be safe. But what shifted for me is I don't need those things to be whole in myself.
I think it's terribly important to insist on individual values.
Learning Culture Podcast.
Initiative, creation, all these things which we value. It's now possible to make organizations on a larger scale than was ever possible before.
Learning Culture Podcast.
Teach people to analyze the kind of things that are said to them.
What's up, everybody, and welcome back to the Learning Culture Podcast. I am your host, Andrew Barry. This is a show about creating cultures of learning inside companies. And joining me for this week's episode is Massimo Backus. Massimo built his successful executive coaching practice based on the radical idea that self-compassion is a leadership epiphany. It's radical because it's in direct opposition to the traditional leadership approach that emphasizes the need to become less of a human in order to become a better leader. Now, through his coaching practice, group facilitation, speaking, and the launch of his upcoming book, Human First, Leader Second, Massimo is taking his message of self-compassion to the C-suite of the Fortune 1000 and to this episode of the Learning Culture Podcast. I found a lot of personal resonance in Massimo's story of finding self-compassion for himself. He calls himself a self-described, or he got feedback that he was a bit of an asshole as a boss. And he took that feedback to heart, and that set him on his journey of epiphany, which he shares with us in this episode. So you're going to learn a lot about what it means to be self-compassionate, how that is not to be mistaken as weakness in any way, but it's actually the source of one of a leader's greatest strengths, and it connects very strongly to vulnerability. I know you're going to get some practical lessons from this conversation because I definitely did too, and I can't wait to get my hands on Massimo's book. So check out the links in the show note to connect with Massimo and to get a copy of his book, which should be out now if you're listening to this. And in the meantime, sit back, relax, and enjoy my episode with Massimo Backus. Massimo, welcome to the show.
So good to be here.
I'm excited for this conversation. Before we get started on the topic at hand for today of self-compassion, I saw a post on LinkedIn recently. You've been married for 15 years now. Congrats on that milestone.
Yeah, just celebrated last week.
Yeah, and I think your wife posted this, that you've hired and you've been working with a marriage coach for a little bit. And I find this fascinating. My wife and I have talked about this as well. I think it's particularly interesting because you are both coaches yourselves. It sounds like from that post you have, a great marriage. There's not like a massive problem you're trying to fix, yet you still reached out to find a coach and you're working with them and finding value in that. Why did you do that?
I think being coaches first and foremost, we're both wired for continuous learning. And it's not from a place of we're not satisfied or things are not good enough, but it is a striving for how could things be even better? What could be improved upon what is already a really loving and supportive marriage. Also, being that we're both coaches, our work worlds have intersected more than they ever did before. When we got engaged and first married, that was never a part of the plan, and yet here we are 15 years later, and our lives are very much aligned both personally and professionally. And then you add in the last 2 years, we went through an extensive home renovation and growing our businesses and writing a book and all of these life stressors, even on the heels of COVID. And we just realized we're not really equipped as much to solve some of these problems, and that it's helpful to have a third party. It's the same reason that people would hire me or hire my wife as coaches, is to have somebody who has that objective point of view and potentially some tools that we weren't aware of, to address things and understand both what was happening inside of each of us in our relationship, and then what was the impact of that on the other person and what was happening inside of them. And that was probably one of the biggest benefits, is that I was able to truly understand how my words, actions, or the times when maybe I'm silent and not saying what's on my mind, how that impacts her. What is the unintended consequences of my behavior, and same for her with me. And knowing that it creates a different priority in making sure that we're always working towards moving towards each other. And we look at our marriage as our top priority. We're also parents, but I look at my marriage as even a higher priority than being a parent, because that's what I want to model for my son.
Yeah. I think two things that strike me about this. One, and I go to therapy as well, and I initiated that process because of a desire for how to improve, how to get better, how to develop personally. And I think the benefit of something like therapy is that making things explicit, like actually, giving words to it and creating a common language and stuff. And you can get this from reflecting and journaling and stuff as well. But there's a unique benefit to having an independent third person kind of, be a mirror, be a facilitator, that kind of thing. And then two, this is a testament to both you and your wife that you're coaches, but you do coaching yourself. Like you drink the champagne, you eat the dog food. Like and I think that's great. I think a lot of people can sometimes look at a coach and be like, oh, well, what do they know? Like, why would they, but you're like, everyone's figuring it out. Everyone can benefit from a coach.
Everyone can benefit from a coach. If I could wave a magic wand or be king for a day, that's what I would want for everyone, that everyone has access to that sort of support. These are what it means to be human, how it is to be human and in relationship with other people, is something that we learn on the job. Meaning it's something that we learn every day of our life, but very rarely is there a playbook that we can follow that helps us. And so it's when times get hard that we start to look for that playbook. And I think that we should always be looking for what could be better, even when times are good. Because that is only going to help us be better humans ourselves, and therefore have a positive impact on the people that are around us, the people that matter to us.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. Yeah. So I thought that would be a good place to start, to kind of set the context here from like, this guy, practices what he preaches, which is always great to see. So let's talk about humans and Human First, your book. I think you've just recently, actually received the hard copy of, the artifact, right, that represents all that work. Yeah, there you go.
Yes.
Human First, Leader Second. What did that feel like when you finally got it, wrapped and packaged?
It's surreal, and my experience of it comes in waves. There's moments of joy and this great sense of accomplishment, and I'm proud of what I've done. And I know, there was no blood, but there was a lot of sweat and tears and hard work that went into this. And and in the spirit of practicing what I preach, the book is about self-compassion. This has been a forcing function for me to practice a tremendous amount of self-compassion. The amount of self-doubt that comes in when you're writing. Who am I to write a book? Who am I to put my name on the cover of a book? Will anybody care about what I have to say? Is any of it any good? And while it feels great in this moment to hold it in my hands and to be able to share it with people, I am eager and anxious to hear how people receive it. Is the intention of what I put in here, what I envisioned this could be for people, is that going to be a reality or will it not?
Yeah.
And throughout this whole process, I've had to learn to let go of any expectations around it.
Oh, yeah. That's another whole thing we could get into.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay.
But I'll
So,
tell you this.
yeah, go for
I'll
it.
tell you this. In the last week, I've started the marketing and promotion of it in earnest and sharing it with my network and my community and past clients and current clients. And the outpouring of support from people is so incredibly moving to me, Andrew, that I can't put into words. Just last night, an email was sent out. I hopped online when I got up this morning, and to just see the number of responses from people that are sharing congratulations and that they're looking forward to it, or sharing something that they remember from working with me in the past and how that still holds a very positive place for them. You know, that's not why I did this, but it's a great feeling, and it's something that I wish for everyone to feel seen as the way I do right now.
Yeah, and you start that by putting yourself out there, like you've done with this book, right? And then you've seen, you didn't know how people would react, but it's been overwhelmingly positive. Yeah. So, okay, we're going to unpack that. For some context, we're recording this on August 14th. You may be listening to this at home or in your car or on a run, and maybe after the September 10th. So this may be out. There'll be links below. Definitely go check it out if this is interesting to you. My goal today with this conversation is start to unpack the book a little bit more to tease people, to tease out for people what it's about. And I'd like to start that with your sort of reason for writing it. Like, what was the origin story of this? When did you realize that this message needed to be shared?
It was epiphany. I had an epiphany about self-compassion and leadership. And it was a Mr. Magoo style situation where I quite literally stumbled into it. 6 months plus prior to me having this epiphany, I received feedback through a 360 assessment, which was a part of the leadership programs that I was running within an organization. And, you know, I wanted to eat the own dog food and have the champagne. And I thought I should do a 360 as well if I'm ascribing this to all the participants and the leaders that I work with. And while as a facilitator and a coach, I was seen as very skilled and capable, the feedback that I got from my team that I led told a very, very different story. And the descriptions were things like that I was defensive. One person described me as a bully, that I didn't create psychological safety, that I wasn't open to other people's points of views, that I was intimidating and closed off. In fact, when I heard that I was defensive, I responded with, I am not defensive. I think you're being defensive for telling me that I'm defensive.
Classic defensive move.
Classic. So clearly there was a big miss. And I felt like a hypocrite to be someone who is espousing what it means to be a great leader. And through this objective data, I wasn't. And I spent the next 6 months trying to reconcile that and figure it out myself, because I didn't see myself that way. I didn't want to be defensive. I didn't want to be any of the things that I was being described as, and yet I was still doing it. And that's a pretty common place for leaders to find themselves in. And I'm showing up in a way I don't want that. I have the best intentions, and yet it doesn't matter what my intentions are, because the impact of my behavior is having a different, something different than what I want. 6 months later, I met with my manager thinking that I was going to hear, you've done a great job. We can tell you're working. And, you know, the feedback is now resoundingly positive. And that was not the case. The feedback was pretty much, we can tell you've been trying, but it's much the same. You haven't really changed.
Wow.
And so instead of them asking me to take the door and exit myself, which is probably the most common thing that would have happened in that situation, my manager suggested that I go to a retreat called the Hoffman process. And their slogan, their tagline is, when you're serious about change. And I went into this blind. I didn't know anything about it. I hadn't heard anything about it beforehand. My manager, who was recommending it, hadn't been through the program themselves. But it was a leap of faith. I figured I'll do anything that it takes to change, and I don't know how to do it on my own.
Mm.
And it was at that retreat that I was first introduced to self-compassion. And it was a moment on day 4 when I went for a walk between different parts of the day. It was kind of a midday break, and I was just walking by myself through the woods. And I remember so vividly, this was the moment of epiphany, the moment for change. I remember that there was silence in my mind, that voice, that chatter that was always there, so omnipresent that I didn't even know it was there, was gone. And that stark contrast from it being so present to, the elevator music being silent struck me. And I remember that my senses were heightened, that I could hear things in higher fidelity. I could hear the rustling of the leaves as the breeze went through the branches of the trees. And I felt the sun like touch my skin in a different way and warm my body, alive to a different degree that I've ever felt before.
Yeah.
And in that moment, I started laughing hysterically. The kind of joyful laughter that we get as children, where
Yeah.
you laugh so much that you're laughing, and how much you're laughing, and it's just pure, like, abundant joy. And that was the first moment at 36 years old that I learned to love myself, what it actually meant to love myself fully, wholeheartedly, like all aspects of me.
Mm.
And why this is important is because all of the behavior that I was demonstrating that I wanted to change came from a place of not loving myself. I was defensive because I thought I had to prove myself to be smarter, stronger, better, more confident, more articulate than other people. That I wasn't open to other people's ideas because if someone's idea was better than mine, then it meant my idea was bad. I was viewing the world in a very immature and binary way, and I wasn't even aware that I was doing it. And that is not uncommon. But the realization that what I was doing wasn't helping me or helping anyone else around me, and that I was fully responsible for it. I had no one to blame. It wasn't anyone's fault. No one did anything to me. It was all my own doing, was a pivot point. And that I didn't need to take responsibility for things that weren't mine. I just needed to be fully accountable to myself. And that means that I get to celebrate all the things that are great about me, my strengths and my good qualities. And I also have to embrace all the things that are not so great. And there's plenty. But I have to do so in a way that's kind, that's loving, that's supportive, so that I can seek to understand where it comes from. And that critical voice served a purpose. But in its absence, I was able to change my relationship to what it was trying to do. And I would imagine people listening can relate to a critical voice of judgment, criticism, perfectionism, blaming, complaining. Maybe they're defensive themselves. Maybe they feel like they're a victim of circumstances. They don't feel like they have control over things, or they're fighting so hard to have control, because once they do, then they'll be secure, safe, supported. And all of that is fundamentally a myth. Like perfection is a myth. Control is a myth. These are not things that we could ever fully attain. And the critical voice that we all have is essentially espousing a myth to us, because it's trying to protect us. The voice is saying, if you're perfect, you'll be safe. If you're the smartest person in the room, you'll be safe. If you have a bigger team in your organization, if you have more money, if you have more title or prestige, then you'll be safe. And those are all external factors that are great. I'm not knocking any of them. And I think ambition is great. I'm highly ambitious. But what shifted for me is I don't need those things to be whole in myself. I can still want them. I still aspire. But whether or not you get the promotion, or you get the raise, or you get the girl, or you get the guy, does it make you more or less of a person who's worthy of kindness and compassion?
Beautiful, and so much to unpack here. So Okay, let's start. I think this concept of the inner voice, the critical voice, being this protector, right? It's playing a role. It's like a biological, like primal role, right? And it's like it's just optimizing to protect you. And to your point, it's optimizing to perfection because that's all it knows. But what you have learning here is that that's not only is it not attainable, but it's actually not desirable. That you don't want to get to that. And it's the part I want to tease out here is how it led to the negative ways others were perceiving you, so like I almost think of that, and you tell me if you agree, like that critical voice is it's there to protect you, and it's so therefore it's also almost lashing out at others who it deems as a threat, and that kind of like where it goes for you.
Yeah, you start to perceive things as threats that aren't threats. I like to think about these critical voices as WIMPs. That's an acronym for well-intentioned, misinformed protector. Well-intentioned because they're us. First of all, this isn't some other entity. This isn't a wooey spiritual concept. This is a part of our psychology that is developed in us when we're children as a protective mechanism to get through life, to make friends, to deal with hardships. So it comes from a good place. It's well-intentioned. Yet it's misinformed because it was developed in us when we're children and we did not have the capacity to be resilient, to have difficult conversations, to set boundaries, to ask for what we need. Our brains weren't even fully formed, from a cognitive perspective at that point in time. And so they're misinformed in trying to protect us in ways that we don't need protecting.
Right.
So for example, with me, if someone were to question my work and I would get defensive, it was protecting me as if someone questioning my work was an actual threat to me.
Right. Yeah.
Not a threat at all. In fact, potentially it will create a better outcome because now we're collaborating, right?
Exactly.
But this part of my psychology was not intellectually aware enough to recognize that. And so you're right, it's very primal. It was like, this is a threat, protect yourself. Assert dominance, make sure that you speak up, make sure you look smart. And in hindsight, Andrew, it is comical to me. It's funny. And I think it's important to note that this epiphany happened for me, and it was several years that I kept it, I guess, kind of my own secret. I would share my experience with people, but I didn't have this epiphany and go, and I'm going to write a book about it because now I'm the expert. I spent several years afterwards trying to practice compassion myself to get better. The epiphany didn't change me overnight. I'm still very much a work in progress. But it was over the subsequent years in practicing it and observing it in my clients and the people that I work with that I realized they also have their own version of a well-intentioned, misinformed protector. They're striving for perfection. They struggle with things never being enough. They get the promotion, they feel good for a minute, and then all of a sudden, now they need the next thing. They're not satisfied because they don't have the external accolades to constantly feed their self-esteem. And external accolades are like eating Cheetos. You don't eat just one Cheeto. You start eating a Cheeto and all of a sudden, like, the bag is gone. And when you're done, you kind of feel bad about what you just did, but also you're still hungry. Because external validation, while it feels good, it's not nutrient-dense food. But when we're internally resourced, giving ourselves compassion, giving ourselves resilience, that's nutrient-dense food. That's sustainable. That's staying power. And when you really care about something, if you're a leader, you really aspire for something that is bigger than yourself, you want to make a difference, then you better be, filling your body up with nutrient-dense food for that journey because it's a long haul.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, definitely. Okay, so I have a personal example here that may also help. You shared a great one, and I think this may help some of the listeners to find their own. And I encourage anybody listening now to also think about your own context. But for me, one I've realized through therapy actually is that I have this overwhelming need for people to be enthusiastic about the things that I'm enthusiastic about. And I think it's funny because I see with my oldest son that same behavior, and I think it's like a first child thing, and needing it, craving attention and stuff. I don't like being the center of attention. I don't want it to be about me, but like if I find a thing, I'm like, this is amazing. Everyone, I need people to agree with me, basically. And so that plays out. And obviously, if that's not met with the same level of enthusiasm, I get frustrated, I get annoyed, and I, start to get defensive. And it's weirdly like make it seem like it's some attack on me, like, as if it's questioning my taste or I don't know, something random, right? And so the point is that's a part of me. It's like in my psychology, it's there, and it's the what you're saying is like you can't fix that, you can't change that, you can't, but you, and maybe you can, maybe it changes over time, but you can. What you need to do is accept that that's a part of you. And it's that acceptance that sort of brings it into awareness that it's something that's now, it doesn't have power over you. You have sort of mindfulness over it.
I think you first have to be aware of it, which you are, and then you have to accept it. But it's important to think about acceptance is not apathy, and it is not a resignation that things won't change. Mm-hmm. Acceptance is what is happening, like what's real now. It's honesty.
Yeah.
So for you, if in your example, if you are accepting that when someone isn't as enthusiastic as you about something, that you get defensive because you take it as some sort of criticism of what it is that you like, or that someone doesn't agree with what you think is important, then you have to accept that as, okay, that's where I am right now.
Right.
Does not mean it won't change, but that's where I'm at right now. And then from that, you can move into accountability and say, okay, well, what is it that's real here? If someone, if you tell me that you love, Indian food, for example, and I say, I'm not really a big fan of Indian food. It's too spicy. It upsets my stomach. Does that actually say anything about you?
Yeah, no, definitely not.
But your well-intentioned, misinformed protector is, well, if they're not in, then they're out, and that's a threat.
Right. Exactly.
As opposed to accepting the reality of it and going, okay, well, I guess maybe they're not interested in the same way, and maybe they will change their mind, and maybe they won't.
Yeah.
But there are other people that would love to go and get Indian food with me, so I'm going to invite them.
Exactly. Yeah. It's that, it's short circuiting that irrational storytelling that we have, that path you can go down of like, oh, this is, now, everyone's judging me for liking this Indian food or whatever the example is. And so I think that idea of accepting it and sort of like now, like just being comfortable with that part of yourself, not even trying to change it. I'd love to get your thoughts on that. Like, do you recommend in your book and with your clients that people try and change these things, or is it just accept it like that? That's enough.
Yeah, I think you have to start with accepting it. And then after you've actually done that, you can choose if you want to change it. It's funny, your example around getting defensive of people not being enthusiastic about the things that you're enthusiastic about. I do that too.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, that's
so
interesting.
When I say accept that, I mean accept it. Like, okay, this is true for me. This is an experience that I have when people don't are not enthusiastic in the same way as I am. Now, accepting it, I can say, do I want that to always be the case? Like if I accept it, am I willing to accept that forevermore that I will have that feeling of this being a threat or feeling less than because someone has a different point of view than me?
And just to pause in it, I can see the answer being a plausible yes there. Like, actually, yeah, I just accept that, and like I start to like own my own individuality around Indian food or whatever the case is. But so like that's one path as well. But you were going to continue it as well.
Yeah, I mean, accepting it is one thing, but you have to like fully own it. Like to admit to ourselves that we would get defensive about something like that is not noble. That's not something that we necessarily want to go around broadcasting to people. But fully accepting it about ourselves, it takes the sting out of it.
Yeah,
right.
Exactly.
Like I don't like sitting in traffic. I could change that, but I guess I accept that I just don't like sitting in traffic.
Yeah.
Right. I don't like rude people. I don't like crowded spaces. I wish that I liked going to see live music, but I often find that I don't. It's crowded and it's loud and I can't talk to people. I got to accept these things.
Yeah.
And then there's certain things that I had to accept that are less, glowing parts of my personality that I didn't want to keep, that I wanted to change.
Yeah.
And for me, the biggest culprit of that was being defensive. I mean, Andrew, I used to get defensive about everything. I've never loaded a dishwasher properly, according to my wife. So I have to accept that I probably never will. But what I wasn't willing to accept is that I would get defensive when she would open it up and move the plates into a different order to meet her needs.
Yeah.
And I was like, I'm not going to accept that. I'll accept that I'm never going to get it right, but I'm not going to be bothered if she chooses to change that. I'm not going to interpret that as, oh, I screwed up or I did something wrong.
Right. It's just that there is another way to do that. That's a big part of this, I feel like, as well, is that just accepting that there are other ways to do things, and that like the way you do something and the parts that you choose to accept and have self-compassion over can just be the things that you want. It doesn't have to, like, not everyone has to agree with it. That's a big part of this as well.
Which is a hard thing to come to. It sounds like you and I are alike in this way. We want to be liked.
Oh yeah, 100%.
Right?
Yeah.
And so there's a balance of, am I accepting the things about myself that aren't really harming other people? They only harm other people when the defensiveness comes out of it. Right? Where me feeling bad about something retaliates on other people in some form or fashion.
Yeah.
That's the part that I've got to change. But if somebody, the vulnerability that goes into writing a book, I'm going to be exposed to people saying like, I didn't like it.
Yeah.
Or your cover's ugly, or I don't like the title, or it didn't make any sense, or whatever. I'm going to have to accept that those people might not like it. And I'm going to have to make sure that doesn't become a reflection on how I view myself.
Yes. Yeah.
Equally to when someone says it's the greatest book I've ever read, that I don't take that on as I'm the greatest author ever. Right. So if I am going to accept that people are going to respond in different ways, then I have to treat it equally. I got to take if I'm going to take the good, I got to take the bad. And if I'm not going to take the bad, then I can't really take on the good either.
Yeah, I was going to say, feels like one of the big benefits of self-compassion is equanimity, is the sense of, right? Like, do you touch on that in the book, or like, do you have okay.
Yeah. I mean, you nailed it. That what I'm describing is equanimity.
Right.
And it's liberating, because fundamentally at its core is a relentless responsibility for what is in your control and letting go of everything that is not in your control. What's in my control is everything that is from cover to cover in this book.
Yeah.
Once it's out in the world, it's not in my control anymore. And so I can be at peace with that, because I know the line of what's in my control and what's not.
Yeah.
And that's a daily moment-to-moment practice.
And that's 100%, right? And another thing I was going to come back to is that this idea of always being a work in progress. There's no end in state in self-compassion. There is a constant process. And even these things we've talked about ourselves, like this one about me, I know I will constantly, for the rest of my life, have that as a thing that I'm thinking on, working on, whatever. Like, it, not even like, again, not trying to fix, not trying to end, but it's enjoying the process of it in a way.
Yeah, it's enjoying the process. And I worked with a therapist for 20 years, over a 20-year period, on and off. And he retired about a year and a half ago, which was like devastating. I mean, this person was a meaningful part of my life for many, many years. But early on, when we started working together, he offered a mantra for me, which is, I, Massimo, am a work in progress.
I love that.
I, Massimo, am a work in progress. Put your name in and take it. It's free. And it's in the book. And I talk about other other mantras, and I'm not talking about manifestation or looking at the mirror and saying that you're, good enough. But I'm saying is a reminder of, that's right, I'm a work in progress. And the goal is, can I be a little bit better tomorrow than I was today? Can I do a little bit better tomorrow than I did today? And some days are going to be easier than others. But the epiphany that I had, Andrew, about self-compassion and self-love was a moment of recommitment. And it was essentially in that moment that I committed that for every day that I am lucky enough to wake up and breathe, I'm going to commit to trying to love myself as much as I can. Some days that's easy, and some days it's near impossible.
Yeah.
But there's no finish line. There's no goal.
Yeah.
And when I take my last breath, I'm probably not going to know it's coming. So I'm not going to say like, okay, I'm complete.
Yeah,
There's no completion to it. But that is an intention and an orientation for things. It starts to make what seems insurmountable or overwhelming, stress-inducing, anxiety-inducing, just that much more manageable. Because all you're really focused on is, can I do that today? And on the hard days, it's like, can I treat myself with love this morning?
Yeah.
Can I be compassionate, for the next 10 minutes?
Right, exactly. So you're getting into some of the practical tools and techniques and things that you've used, and I'd love to touch on a few of those for folks listening. Before we just dive into that, I think the last part of what we just talked about really hammers home the point you made earlier about resilience. That is resilience. Like, that is building resilience, and we all know how important resilience is, and that's literally the way to build it, is to try again, is to get up, and tomorrow I'm going to do better. Like, that's resilience. That's all it is. Yeah, it's a great message.
The research around self-compassion over the last 20 years, Chris Germer, who's one of the kind of the most prominent researchers in self-compassion, and a partner with Kristen Neff, who wrote the book Self-Compassion, he says that the research is actually getting boring around self-compassion. Because if you look at any marker of well-being, self-compassion has been proven to have a positive impact on any single marker of well-being. So it's a superfood. It helps in every conceivable way with which we want to be better versions, more conscious versions of ourselves. And resilience is one of those things. And self-compassion is a trigger for a growth mindset.
Yeah.
Because when we practice self-compassion, we are orienting ourselves towards the notion that we're a work in progress.
Yeah.
That progress is possible, and that it's a worthwhile endeavor. And you're right, that's what drives resilience. And that's table stakes in organizations today. Because the relentless pursuit for up and to the right, whatever it might be, we're always going up and to the right, more and more and more and more and more. Next year's got to be bigger than last year. That's a never-ending pursuit, and it requires grit and resilience and perseverance to be able to do that. But where we get tripped up is we lose sight of our humanity, especially people that are in leadership positions. They start to think, well, I've always been burnt out. I'll just push through.
Yeah.
The reality is, like, we're all human, and the only thing that makes an organization are the people that organize towards the common goal. That's it. And to negate or neglect the fact that we're all humans having a human experience in this is it's just a gross oversimplification around what's going on.
Yeah.
And the energy that people spend trying to mask their humanity, their hopes, their dreams, their doubts, their insecurities, is the biggest waste in organizations today. The biggest waste of time, money, energy, and resources.
Yeah.
And it's not incumbent upon anyone to do it for you, because self-compassion is a personal practice, but it's incumbent upon all of us to make sure, can I get right with my relationship with myself so that I can be best in relationship to others?
Yeah. Yeah. There's a line you just said there, this the biggest waste of time in companies right now, biggest waste of potential in companies is people not fully experiencing and sharing and living into their desires, wants, fears, all of the things that make us human. And that, like, I think is so at the core of self-compassion, right? Is that and I know I've done this so much in my own life, is that we tend to shut down parts of ourselves that we're embarrassed by, or that we want to hide, or that we're scared of feeling hurt, and so you just shut it down or even cut it off, right? And that's the worst thing you can do as a human, right? Like, you're literally shutting down a part of who you are.
Yes. And it's self-abandonment,
Yeah.
right? It's a form of self-sacrifice.
Mm.
And I would argue that organizations today where the majority of people are self-sacrificing are self-sacrificing organizations, right? Because the organization is just the people in it.
Definitely.
And I have a dream, a vision for self-actualized organizations, which is where each person isn't hiding who they truly are. And I think it's important to clarify, I'm not promoting oversharing.
Yeah, good point.
Right? I'm not promoting that there shouldn't be professional decorum or anything like that.
Right.
Again, this is a personal work that people do individually. And through that, then you get comfortable with what are the parts of myself that I am hiding that are appropriate for me to share, and that I'm comfortable with sharing. And then when I do, I will no longer be abandoning myself. To your point. Because I think that sometimes the push for vulnerability has moved the needle a bit too far with what people are sharing. And it's and the question you have to ask yourself is, why am I sharing this part of myself with someone else?
Yeah. Yeah.
And if it's self-serving, then that's the red flag to maybe say, stop that.
Yeah, that is really great advice. You're writing that down. Yeah. So let's talk for briefly about the sort of practice. What have you found is sort of the most useful tool or technique or thing that you practice that helps you, be better at self-compassion?
Yeah, the reality is there are so many different practices that people can use. And I'm dyslexic and ADD and have a hard time with consistency on certain things. So I don't pick just one, Andrew. I have many, and they're all written out and very kind of clearly laid out as a choose your own adventure in the book to try these different practices and see what works. And in certain situations, some will work better than others. But to give you kind of a few of my favorites, the first is making a commitment to increasing our emotional fluency. And what I mean by that is being able to, with a high degree of accuracy, name what it is that we're feeling. It's easy to say I'm angry, I'm sad, or I'm happy, but what are some other descriptors? What type of anger is it?
Yeah.
Is it disdain? Is it disgust? Is it rage? And recognizing that by naming an emotion, one, that emotion is more likely to pass and move on to the next emotion than when we resist it, then it actually has staying power.
Yeah.
And when we recognize an emotion, we need to be non-judgmental about it. So it's not, oh, I'm frustrated and now I'm angry because I'm frustrated. That's having a feeling about our feelings, but to be non-judgmental about it and be curious, like, I'm feeling angry now. What about this situation is making me angry? And then what is the unmet need that is not addressed? Meaning, what isn't present that is causing me to have this negative emotion?
Yeah.
I don't feel seen. Someone's talking over me in a meeting. My idea wasn't chosen. I didn't get the promotion, or I didn't get assigned to that project. And accepting that, going back to this notion of, right, we're talking about awareness and then acceptance. Okay, this is the reality of the situation. And then we step into accountability, which is, okay, now what am I going to do with that? Do I need to have a conversation? Do I need to ask for something? Do I need to go and vent with the right person in the right setting? Do I need to go and journal about this and reflect on it? Do I need to get outside and get some fresh air?
Yeah, exactly.
but putting ourselves in the position of now we get to choose how we're going to respond as opposed to being reactive, fight, flight, freeze, fawn, because we're experiencing a threat.
Yeah.
So that's like a very micro practice that I use constantly throughout the day.
Yeah.
Constantly.
Yeah. I think that's such a great one to give people now to actually put in practice. And that is something that I've actually used for the example I shared, where like your example of my idea wasn't picked, similar to kind of my thing of, hey, this person wasn't as enthusiastic about it. It's easy to tell yourself that it wasn't picked because it's something wrong with you or your idea or whatever. But no, like maybe there was just a better idea for the outcome, maybe you didn't understand fully the problem. There's lots of reasons basically. And yeah, I think acceptance helps you broaden your perspective on what could have actually happened.
And in self-compassion, this example would be, I'm disappointed that my idea didn't get picked. And that's a normal human experience, that other people also feel disappointed when their ideas are not selected.
Right.
And that doesn't say anything less about me, that I'm still worthy or I still belong on this team.
Right.
And that's the self-compassion practice, to be able to connect it to our awareness, connect it to common humanity, and acknowledgement that no matter, you and I are very different people, we've had different lives, but we have both experienced the whole cornucopia of emotions that humans experience. That's a shared thing, right? So whatever I'm feeling, I know I'm not alone. There are other people that have experienced those things. So connecting to that is important. We don't isolate. We want to connect
Yes.
in our humanity. And then to be able to offer our self-kindness, which could just be to say, it's a bummer when the idea didn't get picked. Nevertheless, that other person's idea was pretty good.
Yeah.
And when you move through that, you're no longer hung up on that kind of not or negative feeling or resentment towards the other person. And you're back in it. You're going like, you can yes and their idea.
Yeah, exactly. Come up with a new idea. I was going to say, yeah. Always a work in progress. That's the whole thing. And you always have another chance. Like you get back up, be resilient, another at bat, another chance to another idea. So I love that. I think what I know you've tried to pack this book with, what you have packed it with, is a bunch of examples and techniques and practices that people can try out, like you say, and see what works. And so I think that's a really great example of one of those, and encourage everyone to check out the book for more of those. As we come to wrap this up, I feel like we could talk about this for the rest of today, but I'm realizing we're getting to the top of the hour here. I'd love to know kind of what your hope is, right? So letting go of expectations here, but you have that hope of why you dedicate all that time into this book. Share a little bit about that with us. What do you hope people take from this book?
I fundamentally believe that self-compassion is the greatest untapped practice in leadership and organizations today. That it is, it's free, it's egalitarian, it's accessible, and it's a right. Every human deserves to have a better relationship with themselves. They deserve to get away from the tyranny of self-criticism and perfectionism and the relentless experience of not being enough. The hope is that in the next 10 years that self-compassion becomes a part of the zeitgeist in organizations, and that it's adopted by as many people as possible, not pushed on other people, not mandated, but that it becomes a part of the fabric of an organization's culture, that we are a culture that practices self-compassion, and that we are resilient and we are compassionate towards one another because of that. And that because we treat ourselves with kindness, we are more inclined to treat each other with kindness. And the friction and the conflict that exists in organizations is 100% part and parcel to each individual's internal conflict with themselves. And that is a work in progress. That internal conflict will always be there. But to put it frankly, if people can figure out their internal shit, there'll be a lot less shit to deal with within the organization. And we have a mental health crisis on our hands. And it's not going to be fixed by more medication. or just simply giving people less work. We need to give people the tools in order to manage how difficult it is to live this beautiful, wild, scary, exciting, experiment of being human.
Yeah. Well, that was beautifully said. And I want to encourage everyone who's listened to this to check out the show notes. We'll have links to Massimo, so you can get in touch with him, to the book itself. I am a huge advocate. I'm a supporter. I want to see this get out there a lot more. And it's helped me a lot personally, so it's easy for me to be an advocate for this kind of stuff. So credit to you for putting this out there, putting your blood, sweat, and tears into this book. And I can't wait for people to get their hands on it. Thanks for coming on the show, Massimo.
Appreciate you, Andrew, so much. Thank you very much.
Hello. I hope you enjoyed that episode. It's Andrew again with a quick message. If you'd like to support the show, the best way to do that is to leave us ratings and reviews where you listened. If you're on YouTube, hit the like and subscribe buttons, and feel free to leave a comment. We love hearing from our listeners and viewers. If you're listening to this on Apple Podcasts, please take the time to give us a rating and leave a review. Once again, we love hearing from our loyal listeners. If you're listening to this on Spotify, please hit the follow button to make sure that you don't miss new episodes as they come out. See you next week for another episode of the Learning Culture Podcast. Thank you for listening.